These are the worst rivalries in UFC history. Jon Jones and Daniel Cormier weren't just rivals, they were opposites in every way. Jones was the naturally gifted prodigy, Cormier was the hard-working wrestling Olympian, and when these two guys faced off for the first time, it wasn't a sports rivalry, it was personal. They despised each other on every level. Jones saw Cormier as a threat to his throne. Cormier saw Jones as everything wrong with MMA. Cocky, undisciplined, and arrogant. It all boiled over in 2014 during a press tour for UFC 178. During a face-off, Jones leaned his forehead into Cormier's. Cormier shoved him. Jones responded by throwing a punch, and chaos erupted. They crashed into the backdrop. People was scared, and security had to flood the stage. It wasn't a stunt, it was a glimpse of real hatred. After the brawl, the beef escalated fast. Jones called Cormier soft. Cormier called Jones a junkie and a coward. Then came the leaked off-air footage.
John. Can you hear that, John?
They finally fought in January 2015 at UFC 182. The hype was enormous. All the trash talk built up to this one fight. And Jones won, but the win didn't settle anything, because almost immediately, Jon Jones's life spiraled out of control. He got arrested after a hit and run involving a pregnant woman, stripped of his title, then tested positive for drugs, then for banned substances, then came a DUI, domestic violence accusations. The headlines kept piling up. Meanwhile, Cormier stepped in. He won the vacant belt. He defended it like a champion. But fans wouldn't let him forget that he didn't beat Jones. He was the paper champ, the backup king. And Cormier hated that. Then came the rematch, UFC 214. The buildup was intense. Cormier walked in ready for redemption. Jones walked in cocky as ever. For 2 rounds, the fight was close. Then, in the third, Jones landed a perfect head kick. Cormier collapsed. The fight was over. Redemption denied. Jones celebrated like the king had returned. He called Cormier a great rival, even showed rare respect. But just days later, he tested positive again. Steroids. The win overturned. Title stripped. And this time, it broke Cormier.
I don't know, man, I guess.
He wasn't crying just because he lost. He was crying because he knew the man he'd been sacrificing years trying to beat was cheating the whole time. And yet, Jon still had the fans. Cormier had done everything right, and still felt like he came up short. This wasn't just a rivalry, it was 2 worldviews colliding. Jones had all the natural talent, but none of the control. Cormier had all the discipline, but none of the glory. Even years later, they still throw jabs at each other. During commentary, on Twitter, in interviews, it never really ended. Because Jon Jones versus Daniel Cormier wasn't just about titles, it was about legacy, respect, identity, and in the end, nobody truly won. Now let's move on to one of the most toxic enemies. Jorge Masvidal and Colby Covington weren't just teammates, they were brothers in arms. They trained side by side at American Top Team, sparred together, cornered each other's fights. They lived together, ate together, and slept in the same house before fight nights. To the outside world, they were inseparable. But behind the scenes, tension started building. Colby had always been cocky, but as the wins started stacking up, so did his ego. Then came the gimmick. He called out coaches, mocked training partners, and eventually he turned on Masvidal. He claimed Masvidal wasn't loyal and that he was jealous. Masvidal didn't take that lightly. He saw it as betrayal, not just professionally, personally. A brother turned snake. The gym took sides. Colby was kicked out of American Top Team, and eventually they signed the fight. UFC 272, Masvidal versus Covington. The lead up to this fight was nasty. Insults and threats. But when the cage door shut, Colby dominated. 5 rounds of relentless beating. Masvidal couldn't keep up. Colby won the fight, but Masvidal, he wasn't done. Just 2 weeks later, Masvidal ambushed Colby outside a Miami steakhouse. He waited for him to finish eating, and then they fought. Colby pressed charges. Masvidal was arrested. There's now a restraining order and a lawsuit pending. And just like that, what started as friendship ended in assault charges. This rivalry wasn't built for the cameras. This was real betrayal and real anger. And the worst part? They'll probably never fight again. One of the most hyped fights in UFC's history is by far Conor McGregor versus Khabib. Conor versus Khabib wasn't just about a belt. It was about legacy and revenge. At first, there was no drama. Khabib was the quiet killer, a Dagestani grappling machine stacking up wins with terrifying control and zero trash talk. He barely spoke English, didn't call people out, didn't chase clout. He let his dominance speak for itself. It all started when Khabib and Conor's teammate Artem Lobov was talking, and Khabib slapped him across the face in a hotel hallway. The first thing Artem did was call Conor. And just like that, Conor flew a private jet from Ireland, grabbed a squad of guys, and stormed the Barclays Center in Brooklyn. He found Khabib's bus, and then threw a dolly through the window. Dana White called it the most disgusting thing ever seen in UFC. Conor was arrested, but now the hype was real. Everyone wanted to see Khabib and Conor fight. When UFC 229 was announced, the press conferences turned toxic fast. Conor didn't just promote the fight, he attacked everything Khabib represented. He mocked his faith and religion, called his father a coward, accused his team of terrorism. Khabib said almost nothing. He just waited. And then came October 6, 2018, the most watched UFC event of all time. Tensions were higher than ever. And when the cage door closed, Khabib destroyed him, took him down again. And again, Khabib smothered him. In round 4, Khabib locked the choke and Conor tapped. But that wasn't the finish. Khabib climbed the cage, pointed, and launched himself into Conor's corner. The arena in chaos. Security stormed the octagon. Conor was punched by Khabib's cousin. After all the chaos, both men were suspended and fined. Khabib later said, "This was not about business. He insulted my family, my faith, my people." He refused to apologize. Conor said it was all just promotion. But nobody bought it. Me personally know that this wasn't just to sell the fight. It was personal and real hatred. And here's the thing. Even after Khabib retired, Conor never let it go. He kept tweeting. Khabib never responded. He walked away undefeated, 29-0. Conor versus Khabib wasn't just a fight, it was a rivalry that went too far, and even years later, it still hasn't really ended. Now to one of the more recent UFC beefs. This rivalry didn't start in the cage. It started with a line that hit deep, way deeper than most trash talk ever should. Dricus du Plessis made a comment that lit a fire. He said he was the real African champion because he trains and lives out of South Africa. It was a shot at fighters like Israel Adesanya and Kamaru Usman, all African-born champions who moved abroad for training. Adesanya didn't take it lightly. He saw it as disrespect, not just to him, but to his identity. And then things got heated. Israel clapped back. Hard. He said Dricus wasn't black enough, that he would show him who the real African is. The UFC leaned into the drama and the fans split instantly. Some backed Adesanya, seeing it as a matter of pride. Others backed Dricus. And it all led to UFC 293. But in a shocking twist, Sean Strickland stepped in on short notice and beat Adesanya. The Dricus fight never happened. But the tension never left. Even now, the potential Adesanya versus Duplessis matchup carries more emotional weight than any title belt. Some fighters battle opponents. And then we have Nate Diaz, who battled the entire system. From the start, Nate wasn't like the others. He didn't care about playing nice with Dana White. He talked how he wanted and promoted how he wanted. He wasn't the poster boy the UFC wanted, but he was the fighter the fans loved. And that's exactly why the UFC never made it easy for him. While others were fast-tracked to titles and fame, Nate was buried on undercards. He was underpaid and underpromoted. Even when he finished top contenders like Jim Miller or Michael Johnson, it felt like the UFC barely noticed. It was like the UFC wanted someone they could control. And Nate could never be controlled. He'd light up blunts at media day, flip off the cameras. The UFC tried everything to box him out. Nate! But then, the phone rang. Conor McGregor needed an opponent. On short notice, Nate stepped in. And what did he do? He choked him out cold and shocked the world. That night, Nate became a superstar. The rematch at UFC 202, one of the biggest fights in MMA history. Nate lost a razor-close decision, but he walked away bigger than ever. Still, even then, the UFC kept pushing back. Nate said they offered him bad deals, bad matchups, and no respect. He wanted real fights and real pay. Instead, they froze him out again. Years passed, and still no fights. Finally, after public pressure built up, the UFC gave him a fight against Khamzatchimaev. Everyone saw it for what it was, a setup. The UFC wanted Nate crushed on the way out. But then, Khamzat missed weight and those plans crumbled. And in a rare twist of fate, Nate got to go out on his own terms, facing Tony Ferguson instead. He beat Tony, jumped on the mic, lit a joint, and thanked the fans like only Nate could. No thank you from Dana. No one beat the UFC at their own game like Nate Diaz did. Not by being the best, but by refusing to play. While others begged for title shots, Nate built his own lane. The truth is, Nate's longest rivalry wasn't with Conor. It wasn't with any fighter at all. It was with UFC management. And in the end, he may not have won all the fights, but he won the war that mattered most. And now, to one of the more recent beefs between Khamzat and Paulo Costa. Khamzatchimaev didn't just arrive in the UFC, he exploded into it. He was fighting every few weeks, smashing opponents with ease, and barely getting hit. People were calling him the next Khabib, but louder and way more reckless. But Khamzat's rise came with chaos. Things started to shift at UFC 279. He was supposed to fight Nate Diaz, a massive spotlight, a huge opportunity, but the day before the fight, he missed weight by nearly 8 pounds. The UFC had to scramble. The card got reshuffled. Nate Diaz ended up fighting Tony Ferguson. Khamzat was matched with Kevin Holland last minute and still dominated him, but the damage was done. Fans started questioning his professionalism. Was he taking things seriously or was he out of control? Paulo Costa was one of the first to jump in. He called Khamzat a fake gangster, started posting memes, and he even claimed that Khamzat ran away from him at the UFC PI, despite both being there at the same time. Even Nate Diaz took shots. He called Khamzat a fat wolf who couldn't make weight and said the UFC was trying to force him into a rigged farewell. Despite it all, the UFC kept backing him. Dana White said he still believed in Khamzat's talent. He's still undefeated and still scary. But the vibe has changed. There's now a pressure on Khamzat. One more blown weigh-in, and the fans might fully turn. And the Paulo Costa fight still hasn't happened. Trash talk, memes, and Twitter wars, but no actual fight. Will it ever happen? Nobody knows. UFC rivalries aren't just about belts and scorecards. They're about personality clashes, broken friendships, and pride. Some of these rivalries made history. Some nearly ruined careers. And a few still aren't finished. Let us know in the comments. Which rivalry was the worst? Which one went too far? And if you want more deep dives into the chaos, controversy, and culture of the fight game, subscribe, like the video, and we'll see you in the next video.